of GDG MENA Digital Days. Now this session will be in English, but of course, we can chat in Arabic as well, and I will answer all of your questions at the end of the session. Now for the ones who are here for the first time, and I know a few who just joined the stream, welcome. These sessions are actually a Google initiative, MENA Digital Days, and they have been running multiple workshops, daily workshops, since March, from Sunday to Thursday. These workshops are on different technologies, on leadership, and many other programs. And personally, they have been very, very valuable to me. So if you are like me, eager to learn something new every day, I really encourage you to go ahead and click the subscribe button. Of course, ring the bell so you can get notified whenever we go live. So in this session, I will be talking about navigation components. And it's not Google Maps navigation, but it's generally about Jetpack navigation. So to start, a little about me. My name is Layale Matta. I'm an Android developer from Lebanon. I have joined Neo Technologies Android team very recently, and I'm part of GDG Coast Lebanon and Women Tech Makers. So as I said, tonight we'll be tackling this little thing called navigation, Jetpack navigation. So what is Jetpack? So the very short definition would be that Jetpack is Android's next generation of components and tools. Now the longer one, Jetpack is a suite of libraries, tools, and guidance to help developers write high-quality apps easier. And I'd like to highlight on easier. How does it make writing apps easier? Actually, these components will help you follow best practices, free you from writing boilerplate code, and simplify complex tasks. 3 in 1. So if we look at the libraries provided by Jetpack, they are divided into 4 different categories: foundation, behavior, UI, and architecture. The navigation goes in the architecture part. And I don't want to forget to mention that all of these components are backward compatible, which means that they work on older versions of the platform. So you don't have to worry about that. And since its launch, Jetpack has seen an incredible amount of adoption between the top apps, the top Android applications. And 47% of the top ones actually use 2 or more Jetpack libraries. And this number doesn't even include the core libraries that we use on a daily basis, like App Compat and Lifecycle. So 47%, that's a huge success for Jetpack. So now if we have to talk about navigation as moving from one screen to another. This is absolutely a fundamental part of Android development. And historically, we used to do this using intents or fragment transactions. And clicking on a button or moving from one activity to another were easy enough. But what if we wanted to accomplish something that is slightly more complex? For example, having a button navigation view. We don't want to only tap on one button and navigate to another tab, but we want to make sure that the right tab is highlighted. We want to handle the backstack more easily, so the user won't get confused whenever he clicks on the back button. So all of these cases are what makes navigation component shine. So let's see the definition. The Jetpack navigation component is a collection of libraries and plugins that provides a robust navigation framework for in-app navigation. So we talked about the guidance that the Jetpack library provides. You can find a lot of pages on developer.android.com that actually talk and go into the details on how you can implement this navigation inside of your app, but also on the insights behind why you should implement it this way. So I really recommend you to go check it out on the following link. And the Code Lab, it will help you and guide you through implementing it yourself. So you can find the link to the slides in a bit in the chat. So now let's dig a little bit deeper and see what we can actually use inside of this component, the API. So beyond the fact that it makes the setup for Android navigation easier, this component will handle the backstack, fragment transactions, argument passing, navigation-based animations, and deep linking. But most importantly, it will gather all of this navigation information into one visualized location of your app that is called the navigation graph that we will check in a bit. This navigation component works out of the box with fragments and activities, but dialogues have been added recently in the latest version, and it makes a good package together, fragments, activity, and dialogues. But also you can extend it yourself, extend the library yourself to make it work with your own custom views. And just a hint, in this presentation, we will be using the fact of having one single activity swapping up multiple fragments. If you want to consider using this, I recommend you to check out this awesome talk, and I have linked it in the notes. So one way to look at the navigation component is to look at it as if it consists of three major parts, and they are the navigation graph, the nav host, and the nav controller. You can look at the navigation graph as the map of your application. It's actually a new resource type. It's an XML file that gathers inside of it all the navigation information of your app. And this information can be visualized in the navigation editor that exists in Android Studio. So it's a graphical interface, it's a graphical editor that will help you create your own navigation graph. All of these screens that you see are actually called destinations, or places that you can navigate to inside of your app. They can be fragments, as we said, activities, or dialogues. In this example, they are fragments. These arrows that you can see are called actions, and they represent the different paths that your user can take inside of your application. And all of this information will be generated in one XML file, your navigation graph. So you can see the different fragments, and inside of them, the different actions. Second, we have our nav hosts. The nav hosts act as a window inside of your layout. So you will add it to your own activity, and it will be a window where we can swap in and out different fragments or destinations that exist in your nav graph. And to add it in your code, this is the layout of my activity. It has a fragment container view with the name nav host fragment if we're considering the fragment navigation. And the last part of our puzzle is the nav controller, and it's the heart of our navigation component. Actually, every nav host needs to have its own nav controller that manages the backstack of the destinations that it has. And it's actually the nav Then you create your navigation graph, you add the nav host inside of your layout, and then you get the nav controller and you navigate. As simple as this. We don't want to forget the first step. This is how you actually add your dependencies in your build.gradle file. You can see that we have two libraries. The first one is for navigation, and the second one is for the UI. This is in Java, but of course, we have our KTX extension if you're coding in Kotlin. And as I said, the navigation UI class library actually will have a support for you to use the options menu, the bottom navigation view, the navigation drawer that opens on the left, and also the action bar or the toolbar. So everything has been being taken care of. You only need to use it. Now let's dig a little bit deeper into the navigation graph. As I told you, the navigation graph declares all the reachable destinations in your app. But there is this constraint that says that every navigation graph has to have one and only one start destination, which is also called the home fragment, that will open whenever you start your activity. Also, it can contain actions and nested graphs. We have the destination. It's the node inside of your nav graph. It's the screen that will be displayed. And by default, as we said, it's a fragment. And of course, we have our actions. The actions will be nested inside of the destination node, but also it can be at the root level of the graph, and it will be called global action. Of course, it should have a destination because an action should navigate us somewhere. It can define animations and back behavior. But one interesting thing about an action is actually that it can have the same ID. In different layouts, we can't have in Android the same ID for different layouts. But in actions, we can actually have them. And we will see that it can be very beneficial in the few next slides. Now that we have basic information on how we can use navigation components, let me tell you about a problem that I faced and that I had to use navigation components in order to solve it. So we had this application with multiple activities, and each activity was an entry point to a big feature. It has complex flows, conditional navigations, multiple activities, and the logic and the business logic was very complex. So we had to follow some rules in order to have a clean code and maintainable code in the future. So of course, what I first did was to search on the internet and find if anyone in the community had this problem and if their solution can actually benefit me. And the one thing I was recommended was this awesome talk that was given at DroidCon Italy last year. And it gave me the perfect solution for my problem. And I like to share it with you because I have used it in my own application. So what they provided as the rules to be used in order to create a clean code and a maintainable code was the following. First, we need to centralize the logic in one single place of the app. Now, it can be per feature, but it also be on the application level. All the logic in one place. The inputs and outputs should be handled through the activity view model because we decided to use the Google standard way of using MVVM architecture. And finally, only one element will be using the nav controller in order to make the code more clean and ready to be maintained in the future. So by following these rules, we actually created a pattern called the flow manager. What it actually does is it converts all the navigation events that it receives to actions and destinations. And also, it checks and looks for the destination changes that should be done, and it sends them to the view model in order to display them on the screen, depending on the screen that you are on. So if we want to look at it in a more visualized way, first we have our activity, and it has its three components: the activity view model, the flow manager, and the nav controller. And as we said, the activity view model will send a navigation event to the flow manager. The flow manager will convert this navigation event into a navigation action, of course, by using the nav controller in order to be able to navigate. And on the other hand, the nav controller will look for any changes that need to be done and will send them to the flow manager. The flow manager will update the view state and will send it to the view model. Now that we have a working pattern, let's see if it actually helps us when we have a very tight or complex flow. Let's see if it still helps us. So let's start small with conditional navigations. One easy step is to have linear flows. What does it mean? It's when we have different screens and we navigate from one to another very simply. So if we look at the navigation graph of this navigation editor that we see here, we see that we have three different fragments. And the two first fragments each have one action. And the action is actually linking to the next fragment. And these actions have different IDs. One is info to phone number, and the second one is phone number to verify SMS token. So if we look at our flow manager code, and if you remember, the flow manager will receive a navigation event and will convert it into an action or destination. So let's see. We have our nav controller. First, we check on what current destination we have. What is our current screen that is displayed? If it's the info, then we execute the action info to phone number. If it's the phone number, then we execute phone number to verify SMS token. Simple, right? We can do this. But what if we wanted to have little efficient code, more efficient? We could actually replace our different action IDs to have the same action ID. We call it action next. And it actually translates what we're literally doing. We're going from one fragment to the next one. And this will actually simplify our code a lot. Look how simplified it is. We are going every time to the next action. Why? Because we are linear. Every time we are going the same way. This is how we simplify it. So we had to have this as a rule. So when a destination contains a single action, we use a generic ID, which is the action next. Now this has simplified our code. What if we have non-linear flows? And we can see this in the second screen. We can actually have two different targets from phone number fragments. How can we solve this? How can we handle it? Well, if we look at the navigation graph, in our first fragment, we have two different actions. But these actions can't have the same ID here because we will be confused which action it is, right? So instead, we will still use probably the same thing in our flow manager. We will still look for the current destination that we are in. If it is the phone number screen, then we will execute the simple function get phone number action. And this function will compute which action will be executed next. And on all the other cases, we will go to action next. Why? Because all of the other flows are linear flows. And in this action, in this function, the simple function, we actually check with the view model. Should we go to verify app token? Then we execute this action. Otherwise, we go to verify SMS token. So as you can see, all of the logic is concentrated in this function, get phone number action, inside the flow manager. But what if we have a more complicated flow like this one? Or even like this one. This is getting more complicated. Or even like this. This was the problem in our app. We have different activities with circular navigation and a complex flow. Let's see how we can simplify this. We know we have a very complicated logic that we need to implement, but let's find a way to simplify it in order to understand it and then to maintain it. So one thing we did is to have something called flow behind our flow manager. Now you can call it anything you want. We just called it flow. This flow will take the current destination that we are on and the current form state. And it could be a view model, a pojo, an object, something that you need in order to navigate. And in return, the flow will return the next destination ID that we need to navigate. So in conclusion, this flow is actually a map. It's the navigation logic that we have inside our app as a map. The entry point, the key, is our current destination ID, and the answer, the value, is the logic that helps us determine which action we should do next. So if I want to show you some real code that we used, we have this register flow. Inside of it, we define our action. It's a data class, but it's actually the map value that we have, that we saw. It contains all the logic. To define it, we have used this lambda. It takes the register flow, that is actually what I call the pojo, or the current form state, and it returns an integer that is the action ID that we will go actually navigate to. And this is our map. First, the key will be our destination ID, our current destination ID, and we will map it to the action that we created using this lambda. So we can see here the specific example that in order to know what action comes when we are on the phone fragment, we check if this user has some invitations, we go to the invite selection screen, otherwise we go to the pricing screen. So you can see that all of this complicated logic has been actually summarized here in this piece of code inside the register flow. And of course, we have this function that actually checks if we are on this destination ID. If this destination exists, then we execute the next action. And this will actually return the action ID, the value that we have. Otherwise, we execute action next. So you can see that all of this complicated logic, complicated flow has been summarized and executed very simply in this pattern, flow manager and flow. And as you saw, we have executed this following the following rules. We have centralized the logic in a single place, which is the flow. We have inputted and outputted through the view model. And finally, we have only one element that communicates with the nav controller, which is the flow manager. This is how we simplified our application. Next, I'd like to share with you some insights on how you can implement your bottom navigation and bind it to the navigation component that we have. So I'd like you to imagine with me, and I think that you have passed through this in any application maybe. You have found this problem somewhere. So imagine with me that we have an application with a bottom navigation view. The bottom navigation is binded to the navigation component. You click on one tab, you have this list, you scroll inside of it, then you click on another tab and you go back. You can see that you came back to the first element of the list and not the one you just scrolled to seconds ago. Why? Because we didn't store this scrolling position and we have lost our state. And this is a problem in different applications that we use every day. So let's look at what is actually happening in the code. Now, this is from the source code itself. In order to bind your bottom navigation view to the navigation component, you have to use the following method: setup with nav controller. Now, inside of it, you can see that we are binding the listener to the bottom navigation view that we have. And we are calling this method on nav destination selected every time we click on one tab. Inside of on nav destination selected, you can see the different options that we are given. And you can see that every time you click on a tab, it actually pops up to the start destination. And what is the start destination? It's actually the home fragment, the start destination of our graph. So what it means is that every time I click a new tab, it's actually popping up everything that is in the backstack and showing me the home fragment. And that's not what we want. So let's skip all the code and see it more visually. We have this screen, our home tab, tab 2, and tab 3. We have our home tab, and it's actually related to our tab 2 and tab 3 by this pop-up to functionality. Imagine with me, the user opened the app. First, we have the home tab that is added to our stack. We click on tab 2 and we have it pop up to the home fragment. And now it's added. We click on tab 3 and we realize that actually the tab 3 pop up to the home tab and the tab 2 is directly dismissed. And the tab 3 is actually added, the tab 2 disappeared from the backstack. Now, if we click again on tab 2, also we have to see that the tab 3 has been dismissed directly. But the real problem is that this tab 2 is actually a new instance of tab 2 fragment. It's not the one that I detached and reattached. It's a new one. And this is the real problem that we have. So fragments are actually being destroyed when a tab is opened. And this is a real problem, a real bug that has been tracked on the bug tracker of the navigation component library. And the Google team has said that, yeah, this is actually a problem that we need to tackle. And in order to support this, we need to be able to support multiple backstacks at the same time. But currently, this is impossible because this is not supported in the current fragment manager library that we have. So apparently, they won't solve it. But a few months later, they came up with a solution, an actual hack that actually can fix this problem. And I'd like to share this hack with you. So imagine you have your activity. You have your navigation graph that contains the 3 tabs that you have, the 3 fragments. And I have added a 4th fragment that comes behind the tab 3, just as a new example, an additional fragment. And of course, we have our nav host, the nav host that exists, if you remember, in our layout. It's binded to our activity and it's binded to our navigation graph. Now, when we first open our activity, we have our tab 1 that is there in the backstack. We click on the tab 3 and tab 1 will be behind tab 3. We click on details and the same happens. It's added to the backstack. But when we clicked on tab 2, we have lost details and tab 3. We have lost the 2 fragments. And this is why, because we don't support multiple backstacks. The hack says that we need to use several nav host fragments to create several backstacks. Let's see how. Again, if we see our schema, we have our activity. This time we're using a frame layout, and this will be the encore of our bottom navigation view. And we have separated our navigation graph into 3 different navigation graphs, 1 for each tab. So tab 1 has a navigation graph, tab 2, and the last one, tab 3, and the details. These different navigation graphs will each one be binded to one instance of the nav host fragment, to a different instance. And apparently, the frame layout will now be able to attach and detach from every NAST host that it needs to be displaying. So in this way, we have actually created our multiple backstack. And this is the hack, and it's actually working. Now, if you need to see it in the code, first you have to list your different navigation graphs. Nav 1, Nav 2, and Nav 3. Second, we will still do the same. We will bind our bottom navigation view using this method, setup with nav controller. But this time it's different. It's an extension function, and it contains all of the logic that I have just described. So all you need is to use it, and use it on your own way and customize it as your app needs. So this is it. Google has provided us with a hack, and it's working. Now, if you're worried, how can you use this code? How can you find it? It's actually open source, and it's available by the Google team on GitHub. You can check it, you can add it to your app, and you can maintain it yourself. So that's it. As a conclusion, I'd like to tell you that navigation component is clean. It's future-proof, of course, because it has been added to Jetpack. And we have seen all the bugs they are solving, and they are solving them depending on what we, the developers, are really prioritizing. It's a Google standard, and I really like when Google puts a certain standard for Android development. It's easy to add into our current projects, and the tooling is amazing. Now, I couldn't be able to make you see all of the tooling we used, but you have seen that all of this complex logic that we had that have been simplified into simple code that is easy to maintain. And of course, it's not perfect, but I really encourage you, if you can use it, please do. And now I will go back and see if you have any questions. So if you have any questions, please list them in the chat and I would love to answer them. Meanwhile, I want to tell you two more things that don't forget to apply for the certificate of attendance and don't forget the weekly challenges. I've been enjoying them and you can actually win a gift box or a Google Home Mini. So don't forget that. And this is it. These are the link to the slides. And thank you. For any more questions, I'm here to answer you. Of course, we will put them in the description box. You can find them in the slides as well if you want. This is the link to the slides. Yes, the navigation component that I've just talked about, it's actually in Android applications. So Android mobile applications. And of course, everyone, if you can fill the feedback form, this will be very beneficial to us to see if you really like it and if you really need some support in navigation components, so we can provide you maybe with a workshops on how you implement it and we can implement it together. Again, if you have any more questions by watching this talk again, you can post them actually in the comments and we can actually answer all of your questions. And if you need any more feedback, yes, yeah, it has been in English. Maybe we can provide another session in Arabic if you are interested. And of course, you can Ask me anything. My DMs are open. So feel free to connect and we can discuss anything that you're finding a difficulty with in Android development. We'd love to know your feedback. So if you need to have this session in Arabic, maybe just let us know and we will provide that. If you need a workshop, a live workshop on how to use them, hands-on workshop, we can also provide that. Okay, everyone. I really enjoyed this talk and I hope that it has benefited you. If not now, by watching it later on, feel free to send us your questions, your feedback. We'd love to help. The community is all about helping each other. I really enjoyed this talk. I hope you have a great evening. Thank you, everyone.